This film is about an important but often forgotten US tank. This one, the M47, the second to bear the name Patton.
For the US Army, it was a stopgap, a filler in while the M48 could be perfected. But to many countries around the world, US allies, and that included a lot of Western European armies, it was a vital part of their armour inventory in the early part of the Cold War.
In this video, you'll see two M47s. One, this one here, is a perfectly restored runner, bought here for Tankfest, courtesy of its owner, Mr. Matthew Pyle.
The other is part of our collection, a restoration project started years ago and never proceeded with. With your help, and we'll talk about this later, we want our M47, the only one in our collection, fully restored and running by Tankfest 2025.
Find out more later in this video or follow the link in the description below. This video has been made possible by our supporters on Patreon, our YouTube members and our super thanks donors. Please join them if you can and support the Tank Museum. And thanks for watching.
1945. World War II has ended and a new age of nuclear weapons has been ushered in. In the United States, first to deploy this most destructive of weapons, defence spend is being diverted to fund a nuclear arsenal and the aircraft and missiles to deliver it.
The tests now underway in the Pacific are being conducted solely for the purpose of improving the military posture of our country.
Given the massive power of these new weapons, what place is there for large conventional armies, and specifically the preeminent weapon of World War II, the tank? The Korean War of 1950 to 53, first of the proxy wars between communist East and capitalist West, answers this question. Tanks are still vital on the battlefield.
In Korea, Western tanks very quickly proved their worth, blunting the Chinese and North Korean human wave offensives. And they were easily able to handle the small and ageing fleet of North Korean T-34s, most of which were destroyed at the Battle of the Bowling Alley in August 1950. Tank design is moving on. With the emergence of new Soviet designs, the IS range, the T-54, the US Army's ageing fleet of M4 Shermans and Pershings is starting to look pretty dated. They're in need of replacement. Now, a new tank design, the T-42, is in the process of development, but it's going too slowly. There's a whole host of mechanical issues, particularly with the drivetrain and the mechanicals. Something is needed to plug the gap.
The M46 Patton, the first tank in a series of 3 that would bear that name, is an upgrade to the M26 Pershing. Basically just has an improved powertrain. But there aren't enough of them, and they aren't enough of an improvement, particularly in gunnery terms. The M46 still has the Pershing's M3A1 90mm gun, which is good in its time. I mean, if you remember the Pershing versus Panther duel in Cologne, but it's looking dated against the 100mm main armament of potential enemy tanks, like the T-54.
The M46 is supposed to bridge the gap until the T-42 enters service. But the problem is, it really isn't up to the job. So where do we go from here?
Mechanically, the T-42 is riddled with problems, and these are taking too long to resolve. But the thing that is ready is the gun. The new and more powerful 90mm M36, the fire control system, and the turret. The solution was to mount a modified T-42 turret onto the proven M46 hull, which in itself contained many tried and trusted Pershing components. The result was the second tank to bear a famous name, the 90mm gun tank M47 Patton, sometimes known as the Patton II, to distinguish it from the M46.
The M46 hull, engine, transmission, drivetrain were kept with very little modification, right down to the long storage bins on the hull sides. Both the turret and the hull are cast steel. They've got a maximum thickness of 4 inches, rising to 4.5 inches on the mantlet, although sloping the armour gives you a line of sight thickness of 7 inches on the glacis.
which is actually very good protection. The M47 had the same AV1790 12-cylinder twin-turbo petrol engine and the GM automatic CD850 transmission as the M46. Now this is a marked improvement on the Pershing, whose crews said it was sluggish compared to the M4 Shermans they'd been used to. The engine's 810 horsepower output gave the 46-ton tank a top speed of 30 miles an hour on good ground and a range of about 80 miles, though both would drop off by at least a third across country.
The torsion bar and shock absorber type suspension, as used on Pershing, was retained, along with an extra pair of track tensioners as used on the M46. Standard tracks were retained, but the rubber track shoes were redesigned. And long mufflers mounted on the rear fenders were fitted to the exhausts. The M47 has a 5-man crew, and is actually the last US tank to have a bow machine gunner, with the bow machine gunner on the right and the driver on the left.
We're now going to talk to engineer Matthew Pyle, who has completed his own M47 restoration project and is going to talk us through it.
So, Matt, you're in the driver's position. Obviously, this is the left-hand side of the tank with the whole machine gunner over on the other side. Could you just talk us through the driver's controls? I mean, this is the first tank I've ever come across with what actually looks like an aeroplane joystick, the thing they call the wobble stick.
Yeah, it threw me, considering I've worked on a lot of British vehicles as well, to get my head around it. So, you want to go right, you just push right. You go left, you push left. That's obviously forward low, forward high, and reverse. So it's brilliant, really, a great design. And obviously the next tank up, the 48, it was put in front of you.
Yeah.
Done away with it. I think it was a real good design,
Because obviously in most tanks you have two steering levers.
two tillers, and you have to
tillers,
press buttons.
But that actually does everything. So if you're in reverse, when you're steering, you actually have to sort of think the other way around. That might be a bit confusing for a baby tanky.
That's it. It does throw you.
What about the rest of the driver's controls? They look relatively normal to me.
Yeah, you've got your parking brake there. And then you've got here is your throttle, and you've got a large foot brake, which is, it's 4 foot long nearly. It's very heavy as well. So, yeah, it's very well laid out, in my mind. You've got a primer pump here. The primer pump originally should sit there, but I found it quite hard to try and do the primer pump there. So I moved it to here. So this is a Sherman primer pump,
right,
and a little gas tank, because this would be your periscope holder.
Yeah. So that's great. You've given us an idea of some of the work you did to restore this tank. I'd like to go up in the turret now, if we can, and talk about the layout up there. So, looking at the layout of the turret, I'm peering down at you two through the commander's cupola. Matt, could you just sort of talk us through the actual turret layout a little bit, and particularly things like the ammunition stowage?
So you've got about 12 rounds that you can get to.
Yeah.
But all the rest of the ammo is stored under the floor.
Right.
Which means turning the turret to the right angle so you can lift the floor up.
Yeah.
And then you can get the rounds out the floor, which is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Especially if if you need a round quickly.
Yeah. So the ammunition load is 71 rounds. You've got 12 rounds in the ready racks. Obviously, it's the onus is on the loader. The moment you're out of action, the turret has to be traversed around, and you have to get the ready racks topped up again because the rest are pretty inaccessible. At different times for different owners, they did actually produce quite a variety of rounds for this gun. AP, HE, smoke, high velocity armour piercing, canister, you name it, they made it for the 90mm gun.
Another innovative feature of the M47 is the M12 stereoscopic rangefinder, which you can see as two bulges either side of the turret. This isn't a new concept. Something similar was fitted to the Panther's Schmalturm turret, but for some gunners, it took quite a bit of getting used to. The gunnery equipment I know is quite sophisticated. And one of the peculiarities about this tank is the rangefinder. Now, on the outside of the turret, either side, just below the top of the turret, there are these two bulges, and they're a huge sort of binocular rangefinder, aren't they?
And that's right, yeah, stereoscopic. We've dialed it in as close as we can to get them right, because obviously this has all been apart. And when we first got it, you couldn't see anything, because inside here you've got little glass prisms, and they're glued, believe it or not, in like a little cage.
Right.
And they'd all fell off.
Okay.
And they were all in the bottom. Yeah. So we had to take it all apart.
Yeah.
Well, Adrian did, bless him. And slowly erudite them all together so you can actually get it to, to see through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, we've got all the bulbs. All the bulbs are changed. It's all been cleaned inside.
Yeah.
So
it all illuminates now.
Yeah.
M47 production ran from July 1951 to November 1953, with the Detroit Tank Arsenal and the American Locomotive Company producing 8,576 between them. From the start, the US Army viewed the M47 as an interim solution, a stopgap until the arrival of T-48, the tank that would become the third of the pattern series, the M48. However, M47 was thought worth it because of the improvement in firepower, and it was supposed that the combining of an existing turret and hull would mean few teething troubles. But a combination of technical immaturity and rushed production meant this wasn't the case. Drivetrain and engine overheating problems, plus poor production standards, meant the first batches of M47s got a less than rapturous reception from their crews and picked up an early reputation for unreliability.
Not that the US Army would have to put up with the M47 for very long. It was used to equip the 1st and 2nd Armoured Divisions from 1952 to 55, US Marine Corps units up to 1959, and then some National Guard units up to 1963. After that, it was rendered obsolete and large numbers were exported.
M48, its successor, and the third tank to bear the pattern name, was a very different new generation tank, with a cast elliptical hull and improved gun and gunnery systems, although it still had the same drivetrain.
In a sense, the importance of the M47 actually begins with the US Department of Defense declaring the tank obsolete and large numbers being exported to Allied nations under the Military Assistance Programme.
The M47 was a major component of Western European defence well into the 1960s, with fleets operated by West Germany, where it's the first tank used by the reformed Bundeswehr after World War II, France, Belgium, Austria, Italy, Spain and Turkey. The most famous M47 crewman of this period is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Carrying out national service in the Austrian army in 1965, he was part of the crew of M47 331, a tank he later bought and shipped to the United States. As well as the Italian army, the Carabinieri, an Italian paramilitary police force, was also equipped with 50 M47s in 1964. These were hastily withdrawn when it was discovered that the general commanding the force was planning a fascist coup against the left-wing government. M47s also went on to see active service with the Jordanian army in the 1967 Six-Day War, with the Turkish army in the 1974 invasion of Cyprus, and in some of the largest armoured battles since World War II, in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. M47s performed well in the Pakistani victories at Chuinda and Kemkaran, but suffered at the hands of Indian Army centurions at the Battle of Asal Uttar, with 97 M47s, M48s and Shermans being knocked out or captured. The area became known as Patan Nagar, Patan Town, after the large number of M47 wrecks left on the battlefield. The final few, the 400 Pakistani M47s, were finally retired from frontline service in the early 2000s. Other countries using the M47 included South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and rather strangely, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia under Tito is usually thought of as a Soviet bloc state, but was actually quite autonomous and acquired 319 M47s. 20 of these were subsequently used by Croatia in its 1995 War of Independence against the Bosnian Serbs. Despite their age, Iran used its M47s in the 1980s war against Iraq, following which they were drastically updated. The resulting tank, the Sabalan, is still in service today.
As we've seen, the M47 service of the US Army was fleeting. And I think it's fair to say that in some ways, this is actually the US Army's last World War II tank design. Having said that, a tank that would have just been an obscure footnote in US military history actually went on to achieve great prominence, a mainstay of NATO and SEATO throughout a big slice of the Cold War, and actually saw a lot of combat on a range of different battlefields.
As I mentioned at the start of this film, the Tank Museum has an M47 in need of restoration. So let's take a look at that.
So, Matt, we've set ourselves the target that by Tankfest next year, a year's time, this M47 will be in the same state as yours and will be fully running, fully functioning and out in the arena.
Yeah, well, so do I.
You've had a provisional look at it.
Yep.
I know you haven't had time to get down into the weeds, but
Yeah.
how big a job do you think it's going to be?
I'm estimating a year to do it. That's what I'm planning on.
Yeah.
That's what we're hoping on.
What are going to be the major challenges? Because the vehicle has been obviously sitting for
Yeah.
a quarter of a century, hasn't moved at all. What are the problems you're going to envisage, do you think?
Things undoing. Making sure everything undoes and doesn't snap off. You know, it's, you know, the good thing is it's been undercover.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
Yeah.
That's probably what saved my one. It
Yeah.
being in a barn,
Yeah.
pushed in the corner and forgot.
Yeah.
And that's what saved it. Outside does no good for these.
No.
But
No.
no, it's it should come up really well.
Okay. So we've got obviously a lot of superficial rust. I mean, parts of it were needle guns as part of the,
Yeah.
the early restoration. But it is just superficial, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no particular rusting out. It's like gate guards and things like that. If they've been sat outside for decades, water gets in and they just
Yeah,
rust out
that's right.
internally.
That's right.
This one, hopefully, you won't have those sort of problems.
No, and it's a simple tank. It's all driven by rods.
Yes.
You know, there's no tricky electronics that you've got to try and find and
Yeah.
do it. It will all run from the engine bay. That's the good thing, and they're simple. Everything we've attacked on mine, it came back to life.
Yeah.
You know.
Hopefully, you're going to find a similar situation. with
Yeah.
this. I mean, in terms of how you actually take the project on, what comes first? What's the first thing?
First
you're
thing
looking at?
will probably be the turret.
Yeah.
That'll come off, and that'll go on the running stand
Yeah.
for now. And then obviously all the tin work will come off. Then the tracks.
Yeah.
Then it'll go in the workshop bay, put it on blocks, and then just go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Clean bearings, take it all apart.
Well, thank you very much for
No, it's great. It's
agreeing to take it on.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
really good news.
I can't wait.
That's an enthusiast, guys. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe. If you can, support us on Patreon. And if you're interested, please follow the link below to find out more about our M47 restoration project.